So we did a lot of mapping for this project. And the whole goal really was to say, who's going to be at risk, what are the people in the infrastructure, and how much is it going to really cost us in terms of economic damages. So we used GIS software, and we produced this whole set of maps. These are all on our website at pacins.org, and these cover the entire California coast, 2,000 miles. These maps, these quadrangles, there's over 200 of these, but I'll just show you a couple. And this light blue is if you can see that very well, what we think is the existing area that's at risk from a 100-year flood. And then the darker blue is what it's going to be in the year 2100 under this one scenario. So you can see there's a lot of people who are already at risk, and the risk in the future is going to be a lot greater. This is the Oakland area where our office is, and some pretty important stuff. There's an old military base there, which is undergoing a massive redevelopment right now. They're sort of trying to figure out what's going to happen there next. Really busy port with goods coming in from all over the world, in and out. Down in the Long Beach area, this is one of the busiest ports in the world, and important to not just the regional economy, but the national economy. Other places, not huge impacts, because you have these sort of very steep cliffs along the coast, but then also Santa Barbara, a lot of their town is actually beneath sea level now. A lot of areas along the California coast have subsided. As we've pumped groundwater, the ground has actually shrunk, and it's gotten lower. This is a big problem in a lot of urban areas in California. Some Santa Cruz area. And who actually was at risk? We determined that about 500,000 people, 480,000, will be exposed to a flood risk by the year 2100. And as you can see, these sort of the size of the circles represents the size of the population. Really, really uneven around the state. A lot of it is centered in Orange County and in some of the counties around the bay. San Mateo County in particular has a lot of land that's beneath sea level. And if they don't take steps to strengthen and bolster up their levees, they're going to be potentially at risk. And the demographics, we were very interested in looking at the demographics of who is going to be at risk, this idea of disproportionate impacts. And I went into the study thinking, well, I don't really feel bad for the people who are going to be flooded. It's these rich people who live in these multi-million-dollar homes. Turns out a lot of those people are going to be at risk, but also a lot of low-income populations. We're really interested in this idea that disasters don't discriminate, and who are going to be the people at risk. And we looked at some of the racial characteristics. People who don't speak English well, who are going to be particularly vulnerable. It turns out people who rent or don't have a really clear property title are more at risk because they're not going to take the steps to flood-proof their properties. People who don't have access to transportation. If you ask people after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, why didn't you leave? A lot of them said, well, I didn't have a car. And so we looked at some of those statistics, and those are all in the report as well. Aside from that, infrastructure, power plants, there were 30 with a combined generating capacity of over 10,000 megawatts around the state, which would be at risk. Wastewater treatment plants, a lot of these are built on the coast for obvious reasons, because that's where you discharge your treated wastewater out to the ocean. So the plants are low-lying, and their outfalls are also at low-lying areas. And there were 29 of those around the state that we identified as at risk. Aside from that, just a huge amount of roads. I realized for an Indian audience, I ought to have put this in kilometers and not miles. So just multiply everything times about 1.7 or 2 to make the math easy. But aside from that, places like police stations and fire stations are especially important because these are first responders, and they're also schools are where people go to be sheltered in the event of a natural emergency. So putting a price tag on things, we said all of this various property that's at risk is going to be about $100 billion in damages potentially. And I think to get policymakers' attention, you really need to put price tags on things. But we also wanted to make the public more aware of this problem. So we tried to make the information as easily digestible as possible. So we have an interactive Google map on our website that you can go to. And of course, the first thing everyone does is they pan right to their house and zoom in as far as they can to say, am I in trouble? And what do we think we need to do? One of the things we can do is we can build levees and seawalls, and we can raise those up. And we decided, we analyzed where we would need to build those, and it turns out we would need 1,000 miles of new or improved levees around the bay and seawalls on the coast. That's about 1,700 kilometers. So massive, massive investment. That would cost about $14 billion to build, just to build. And then there's also the annual operation and maintenance cost, which we pegged at somewhere between $1 and $2 billion per year. So this would be just what we call coastal armoring, massive project, and not really one that we would like to see happen because it comes with certain trade-offs. When you armor the coast, you're cutting off the sediment supply to the beach. A lot of times you're losing the beach, you're losing the wetland that would be on the seaward side of that, and all of this sort of ecological function that provides in terms of wetlands, just vitally important, providing habitat, flood control, and scenery, and recreation, fishing, and all these sorts of things that we value about these. So we think it's inevitable in some places. I mean, we're not going to let San Francisco Airport just kind of crumble into the sea. In other places, we think it's going to be a really difficult decision. We're very interested in the concept of who pays and who benefits. Doing a traditional cost-benefit analysis for, if it costs $1 million to build a levee that's going to protect $50 million worth of homes, the cost-benefit ratio is 50 to 1. It sounds like a no-brainer. But have you taken into account the ecological function of the wetland, the lost recreational opportunities? And when you think of the coast as being, it's a public trust. It's something that belongs to all of us. So what are some of our recommendations? Some of these things are already starting to happen. We think the state will probably need some legislation. There are things that are going to happen at a national level. But the first thing we really need to do is, if there's an area that we know is at risk, limit development there now. That's going to be sort of a win-win into the future in terms of protecting people's lives and properties. Protecting adjacent uplands to keep options open. So what I mean by that is, as sea level rise, we have these tidal wetlands that exist in the intertidal range between low tide and high tide. And as the entire tide regime shifts upward, these wetlands are going to have to migrate